Welcome to Silberman Law Firm's Weekly Docket, where we talk legal news and practical law. Today is October 18th, 2024. I'm Phil Silberman, owner of the firm and your host, and Austin Black is my co-host. How are you doing today, Mr. Black?
I am doing great. I'm so happy that the weather has finally started to remember that it's fall here in Texas. Yeah.
It does take a while to do that.
It does.
Before we get into our docket and what we're talking about today, I have a podcast confession. Okay. So we are on episode 40, and for many of these episodes, I've noticed that my voice sounds a little bit echoey, right? Mm-hmm. And it was driving me crazy, and I was looking at how to fix this, and I couldn't figure out what it was doing. So finally, when all else failed, I called in my 13-year-old daughter. And I said, Rachel, you got to really help me in what's going on. And I thought she's in theater, so I thought she was going to make all these technical adjustments to my office where I record. And she comes in and she looks at my microphone and she bows her head in disgust and says, Dad, your microphone is the wrong way. So the whole time, for all of these episodes, my microphone has been backwards.
Yeah. So thank you, Rachel.
For episode 40, I have the mic now facing the right way, so hopefully I sound a lot better. So
that's good to hear.
That being said, what's on our docket today, Mr. Black?
First, we're going to be talking about our old friends, the FTC, and they are trying again to promulgate new final rules on things that they may or may not have power to promulgate rules on. So we'll talk about that first, and then we are going over Texas seems to be taking a lot of L's recently related to judges striking things down. But again, a judge has struck down a law that the Texas Attorney General frequently used to examine companies. When we say examine, we'll let you know exactly what we mean by that. And then moving on to the legal questions section. 1, can you be forced to testify against your spouse in court? And if you can be forced, can that evidence be used against you? We will let you know, because there are a lot of misconceptions about that principle because of legal dramas, etc. And then if you own a piece of land and someone comes and they build a house on it, can you keep that house? Do you just get a free house? What happens in that situation? We will tell you. And then finally, our rant and rave section. We will be talking about Hollywood and just creators in general taking Ecclesiastes a little bit too much to heart. Okay.
That question about the house, that was a real fact pattern.
Oh, I know. I have one of those cases right now. Yeah.
All right. Let's go ahead and get started with our legal news section.
Yeah.
And the first thing we're talking about is the FTC passing a rule to make canceling subscriptions easier. So for a long time, consumers have complained that it's too hard to cancel subscriptions. Have you ever experienced something like this before, Austin?
Absolutely. The most recent one was there was a Gold's Gym about 3 minutes from my apartment. And that was the gym I went to. I had a membership there. And then it closed. And when it closed, they had a clause in their contracts that allowed them to transfer everyone's contracts to a gym of their choosing, which is insane. I'd never heard of that, but they transferred it to a Texas Family Fitness, which the closest one is like 20 minutes from me. And so it's a big difference in that. Not a huge amount of time, but you could only cancel the Texas Family Fitness gym membership by actually physically going to that location. And so it took me like 2 months before I had the time to go over there and do it. It was just crazy.
That gyms are notorious, and that's actually the biggest one that consumers are complaining about.
Yeah.
And there was another sort of anecdote, a story about having to go to a gym personally, physically go and cancel, which is a huge pain. But yeah, I checked out Reddit, and consumers on Reddit are complaining mostly about gyms. Also hear a lot of stuff about SiriusXM and Adobe. I one time tried to cancel an Adobe subscription, and I think I did have to call in. And it was just crazy. It's one click to sign up, but if you want to cancel, it's a whole to do.
Yeah.
And then half the time you get routed to a special team, and they try to save your business, and they give you discounts, and it can take 30 minutes to cancel something.
Yeah.
But here comes the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, and they're going to save the day. And they've implemented this new click to cancel rule. And the rule basically requires that businesses make it just as easy to sign up as it is to cancel. It doesn't give specific details on what that looks like. Assumably, you would just be able to click to cancel, hence the moniker click to cancel rule. But it passed 3-2 along party lines, and the Republican members of the FTC voted against it. The Democrats voted for it, and the rule passed. I don't understand why anybody, Republican or Democrat, would not want to pass this rule, but the Republicans didn't like it. Probably has to do with lobbying. The opposition came mostly from video game companies, which makes sense. I don't know if you're a gamer, Austin, but
I play some nowadays, but never anything that like has a subscription like that. It would make sense.
Yeah, you could see why video game companies don't want to make it easy to cancel. Publishers, so you're thinking like if you subscribe to a news site or something, they want to make that difficult to cancel. I have a Wall Street Journal subscription. I don't know if that's easy to cancel or not. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But and then advertisers. So those were the big trade groups that were opposed to this. The Republicans came at this from a power perspective. Again, that same argument that the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, does not have the power to make these kinds of rules. We talked a little bit about that in the past with the non-compete. And Austin, you and I both agreed that the FTC doesn't have the broad power to make non-competes illegal. That should be done by the legislature. What do you think about the power of the FTC to pass this rule? Do you think this is squarely within the power of a rulemaking body?
I don't think it's squarely within their power because there's not a law of Congress that says you have to do this. But that being said, I think this is just, with the laws we do have on the books, I think this is enough against the spirit of a lot of those laws that I do think this is within the FTC's purview. And I think that this final rule should be allowed to go into effect.
But I tend to agree with you. I look at this from a common sense approach. And when you try to make non-competes illegal, that just, my spidey sense goes off and I'm like, whoa, that's a really big change to our economy. That needs to come from elected officials. Rules about how to cancel, that's more of sort of what the FTC, in my mind, does have some power to do. Very common structure. Congress oftentimes passes laws and they give a rule-making body sort of authority. That's what the IRS does. The IRS generally has authority to pass certain rules.
That's what they think.
Maybe that's a rant and rave section. But nonetheless, the FTC click to cancel rule goes into effect 180 days from the date it is published in the Federal Register. So we don't exactly know when that's going to be, but it should be effective pretty soon. I'm a big proponent of it. I hate the hoops I have to jump through to cancels. I actually like this one. Not sure why Democrat or Republican would not want it, but there you go. All right, let's go on and talk about our next legal news story. And we're talking about a judge striking down the law that the Texas Attorney General, that's Ken Paxton, frequently uses to examine companies. And it's called, I had not heard about this, but it's called a request to examine power. And what Ken Paxton does, if there's a company that he wants to investigate under this power, he basically just sends some type of request. Maybe it's a letter or email, something like that, saying, hey, give me these documents that have to do with you. It could be like accounting documents. It could be documents related to some widget that you manufacture or whatever. And it turns out that this request to examine goes all the way back to our Texas Constitution of 1876. And back then we had suspicions of corporations. That power, this request to examine power, was actually codified in Texas Business and Commerce Code section 12.151. And it says each filing entity or foreign filing entity, that's basically a corporation, either you're a domestic corporation in Texas, whether you're not for profit or for profit, or if you're a foreign filing entity, then your home state might be Florida, but you're doing business in Texas. But any corporation essentially shall permit the Attorney General to inspect, examine, and make copies as the Attorney General considers necessary. So right there in the Texas Business and Commerce Code, There was a company by the name of Spirit AeroSystems, Inc. They made Boeing 737s. I don't exactly know. I thought Boeing made Boeing 737s. So I'm not sure if Spirit AeroSystems is a subsidiary of Boeing or they're a contractor of Boeing. But they're making airplanes. They get a request to examine from Ken Paxton, and they decide to file a lawsuit. And they say, under the Fourth Amendment, that is a violation of our freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. What do you think about that argument, Austin?
I do not like that. Agree with it.
Okay.
Purely because it's Boeing.
Okay, let's pretend it was a company that you actually liked, right?
Okay. So it just to be clear, it's not about whether I like or dislike the company. It's about whether I think the company is actively assassinating whistleblowers. But yes, I guess you could say that this would be a violation of the Fourth Amendment from reasonable search and seizure because he can do it regardless of anything. It doesn't seem like they need to have any sort of justification or reasonable suspicion of any wrongdoing to request these records. But at the same time, there are a lot of records that are required just as a part of doing business and operating as an entity in Texas. So I can see it both ways.
So Judge Mark Lane of the Western District of Texas agreed with Spirit, and they struck down Section 12.151, saying the Attorney General does not have this power. He actually was quoted as, the judge was quoted as saying this was an easy one. And
the judge, he really wants to protect Boeing. Again, I would want to stay safe too.
There were some political implications here. Some of the reporting implied that Ken Paxton was targeting nonprofits who were trying to help migrants and encourage voting among Latino voters. So there were some political implications. I didn't see any evidence that was true.
If that is true, that's despicable, and Ken Paxton should be ashamed. But he should be ashamed of a lot of things that he's not. But yeah,
he's still in office. I
know, unfortunately.
So my big question, okay, and I'm all for taking power away from the government, right? I'm quasi-libertarian. I don't love, and as a small business owner, I've been audited plenty of times.
Yeah.
And if I've got one less government power to worry about it, I'm all for it. But what I don't understand, this is my question to Judge Mark Lane of the Western District. If the Attorney General doesn't have power to request and examine documents, how is it that all these other state agencies have power, right? Or federal agencies? Like, I've been audited by the Texas Workforce Commission. They just came into my office one day and they were like, we want to see all of your TWC reports, right? For when you have employees and how you're paying and all that. And I was just, I've got nothing to hide. I was just like, I sat the guy in a room. I purposely sat him in the coldest room in the office, right? Or the room that goes 60 some degrees because I wanted him to be uncomfortable.
Is this in the old Houston office?
Yes. So I purposely sat him in an uncomfortable room. And he did his little audit, and he came back and said that I owed like $35.67 after a 6-hour audit or something like that. But wonderful allocation of taxpayer dollars. But why does the IRS have power to request and examine? How about the Texas Department of Insurance? We have a title company as well, and TDI they request to examine all kinds of documents. So I'm not sure what the difference is, but from that perspective, I'm starting to love this guy, this Judge Mark Lane. Can we just file a lawsuit in his court and say that the IRS no longer has audit rights because that's an illegal search and seizure?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
I'm all for that. At some point, probable cause is going to come into play here. But all right, we'll see where that one goes and if that gets appealed up to the Fifth Circuit. And we'll keep everyone updated. Let's go ahead and answer some legal questions. So the first one we've got is, can I be forced to testify against my spouse in court? Now, Austin, you are not married yet, but you may get married soon. What's the answer to that?
No, you can't. You cannot be forced to testify against your spouse in court.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So it's two separate principles, right? So there's spousal privilege, which the spouse can claim, right? But then there's also a principle, and I believe this applies in Texas, where you can prevent your spouse from disclosing things as well.
What we know for certain, and this gets a little more complex, okay, than I think meets the eye. What we know for certain is in a criminal case, the spouse of a criminal defendant cannot be compelled to testify against you, but that spouse can in fact waive that right and choose to testify against you. Yeah. We know that much for certain.
So, okay, what it is, it's the breakdown in spousal privilege in two parts, right? There's the testimonial privilege, which is preventing a spouse from being forced to testify against their spouse in court. So if they're subpoenaed, they don't have to testify against their spouse. But also communications between the spouses during the marriage is not admissible in court without both spouses consenting.
Yes, I think that's right. And with one proviso, which is there's some slight variation from jurisdiction to jurisdiction across different states. The federal rule of evidence actually defers to state jurisdiction in this regard, which is interesting. But yeah, absolutely. Two parts to this testimonial privilege and spousal communication privilege. Yeah, that generally speaking, if you're on good terms with your spouse and you've done something bad, the prosecutor cannot make the spouse testify against you. All right, that brings us to our next legal question. And the first one we've got is someone accidentally built a house. This is a real case. Someone accidentally built a house on my lot. Can I keep it? So I guess you're the owner of a lot. In one scenario, you can imagine a situation, maybe I own some investment property far away from where I live. I'm not going there. I'm not checking on the property. And some builder comes along and just mistakes the lot and builds a house on the wrong lot. If in that scenario, do I get to keep that?
Probably. Yeah. Probably get to keep it. If they just come out and you didn't know as you built all that.
I agree with that. What if the builder is so mad and you shouldn't get a free house, I'm going to come tear it down?
First off, I'm going to ask him why he's being dumb, because I don't think he's going to be able to use most of that for another house, or spend all the labor to do that. But secondarily, it would be a trespass at that point in your property.
Yeah, I can see a builder being mad and just, hey, you shouldn't get a free house. But yeah, you could, in that case, if the builder wanted to come and tear it down, we'd file a petition and we'd get a TRO to stop them from committing the trespass. Now, here's the other scenario. Let's say, and this was what actually I think happened in our case, where the potential new client or the client was watching the builder build the house the whole time for weeks and months, and then called us up and said, hey, he's almost done. How do I keep the house? and I think that's a completely different situation.
Yeah.
And why is that? And I think the answer lies in quantum merit. We talked about quantum merit in a previous show. But you don't get to lie in the weeds and have these unclean hands and have a builder build you a house and then benefit from
that. The way I would answer that question is, first off, we didn't have the first part of this conversation. You've just been sitting in your house and been completely oblivious to the outside world for 9 months until you came out and you saw a house built. This is a random gift, right? That'd be a better fact pattern for you.
Yeah, that too. A little refresher on quantum merit, though. Your elements are the plaintiff has to provide valuable goods or services. Okay. In this case, Austin, the builder has in fact provided services. He built the house, right? Now, the second element, the builder has to provide specifically for the defendant, and the defendant is accepting those services. That one's a little bit tough in this situation. The guy's across the street in his house watching the builder.
I would argue that's absolutely accepting the services.
I definitely accepting is the builder the builder doesn't know he's providing it to the guy, but
the builder knows he's building it on that piece of land, regardless of if he knows that piece of land is this guy's piece of land.
Yeah, I'm on board with you. And then the final element, and this one's I think the toughest. The plaintiff communicated an expectation of compensation. I
think that's such a weak one. I don't think you really have to communicate an expectation of compensation for the building of a house.
And here, all of this needs to listeners need to understand that sometimes you can get into the elements and you think you've got this great case, but there's always the fact finder variable, right? And fact finders want people to do right. Generally, a judge, some of them. Usually judges and juries, they don't want people to just win and get taken advantage of when they've had unclean hands. So in this situation, I really do see the builder prevailing if the guy's just lying in the weeds and watching the house be built. All right, that brings us to my favorite part of the show, and that's our rant and rave section. And we're doing something a little bit different today. This was Austin's concept. I'm going to let Austin take the lead on it, but we're talking about just Hollywood and their obsession with remakes and reboots and not producing original content.
When we were going over the overview, I said that the creators in Hollywood in general are taking Ecclesiastes a bit too hard. And I'm, of course, referencing Ecclesiastes 1:9, which says what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. And I feel like that's just like the lodestone statement of Hollywood and of so many creators nowadays. None of them are willing to go out and make something new. They all want to settle on a safe bet of nostalgia bait or a franchise that they know is going to bring in money. Disney is a really big one, I'm sure. You're quite familiar with that.
I've got little kids, so yeah, I'm familiar with Disney. Yeah. It does seem like every movie that comes out is either a Marvel or a live action remake of something they did a cartoon years ago. So
sure, and I don't have problems with like continuations of things, right? If it's a continuation of something in that universe, it's okay. It could be somewhat different. Yeah, it's got the nostalgia, it's got the IP, the established IP behind it, but at least it's something trying to be something new. But when they just do reboot after reboot or live action out of animation, it was interesting to me that the first live action remake of a Disney animated movie was actually in 1996. It was 101 Dalmatians, a remake of the 1961 movie. Did you see that? Either one of those?
Yeah, I saw both of them. I mean, the original 61 was great, and then the 96 remake was okay. And then, of course, don't forget about Cruella.
Don't forget about Cruella, yeah, the more recent one. So would you, with that one, I wouldn't say that's a reboot or a remake, though. And that's something I'd be more okay with, because I think they're approaching the story from a different angle and focusing on a different character. Because
yeah, you're right, and they do that quite a lot. That was the whole Loki series and all the Star Wars offshoots, and but you're still not dealing with an original concept. I'm with you. I would like to see some original concepts come out. I think Netflix does a good job with this, by the way.
Agreed. I agreed. Yeah, there was a show that was on there recently called Three Body Problem. Yeah. It's crazy science fiction. It would be way too complicated to explain the plot here, but it was original and it was new, and I appreciate it. Breath of fresh air. So
yeah, Netflix is paying millions of dollars for a lot of small budget films. If you ever watch a Netflix film, and that you'll notice that oftentimes there's the storylines have a minimal amount of actors and a minimal amount of set. That's because they had to pay $10 million for the film, and to make a film profitable for $10 million, you can't have that many actors, and you cannot have elaborate sets, right? And you cannot have elaborate CGI either. So, or you've got a whole list of them here: The Jungle Book, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin.
Yeah. The live action remakes that have come out so far, Jungle Book, all those just in the last 7-6 years or so. And then the Lilo and Stitch remake that I don't think anyone asked for is coming live.
The original Lilo and Stitch, it wasn't even that good. I don't even think it did that well. This is bottom of the barrel scraping.
I actually enjoyed Lilo and Stitch, but I don't think it needs a live action.
You are not representative of the normal demographics, but
okay.
You've got aside from Disney, Dune, and Ghostbusters, the last Ghostbusters was like a non-event. The freezing thing.
So there was the one where the Frozen Empire one, right? So that's like somewhat of a reboot. And then remember, they tried to do Ghostbusters with all women in the roles of the Ghostbusters.
Yeah, Ghostbusters they've gotten all the life they can out of that franchise.
They're trying to revive it.
The Marvel movies were sunk until the recent Wolverine Deadpool, which has done exceptionally well. In fact,
they were all going down. Yeah.
They were ready to pull the plug on Marvel, and then all of a sudden Wolverine and Deadpool was a hit. And it's rated R, of course, so I can't really have my young kids watch that. So I have not seen it yet. But a lot of the Deadpool movies are rated R. And then you've also got some music. Same thing with music. You're not seeing enough new music.
Just a lot of people re-releasing old things. Like Taylor Swift re-released all of her old music. You can say it's because she was upset about Scooter Braun owning her catalog or whatever, and she wants to make it her own. Okay, whatever. I don't know. If you want to make it your own, you can make more music too. That would be something you could do. But no, she just wanted to re-release every single one of her older albums, starting at the beginning and coming up to Red, etc. And I don't know, maybe in years she'll be re-releasing the album she released last year. I don't know.
This all starts with the Screenwriters Guild, right? Those are the ones. That's the union that's responsible for most of these writers out of Hollywood, and the big producers, the Hollywood studios. They employ many of these writers, and ultimately they tell the writers what to do, and the writers will do it. But it's pretty cool how some of those contract negotiations have gone down. And one thing that was extremely interesting to me in the last sort of contract negotiation between the Screenwriters Guild and the big studios was the emphasis on artificial intelligence as a tool for writing. And I don't know how good AI is for writing creative content, but it is a very big deal. We've had a lot of AI topics on the previous shows, and the screenwriters obviously did not want the studios to use any AI. I don't think the AI stuff would be very good for creative content, so I don't think they're going to get any help there. So I really think there's going to have to be a rebirth of creative writing and novelists and people that are putting content out there. I think the problem, Austin, is there's just people are so hyper focused on their phones and their social media and just all of the huge amounts of information that they're consuming every day, being bombarded with this, that it's making our society as a whole less creative. So I'm seeing that with our lawyers. I'm seeing that with our lawyers as well, Austin, with new lawyers, young lawyers coming out of law school. They're just not, I don't feel like they're just not as, the critical thinking is just not the same that I've experienced, I think, in older generations. That's just my take on it. I could be insulting a lot of young lawyers out there, but I think this is a bigger problem than just Hollywood. So.
Yeah, a lot of firms, you just get thrown into doc review for the first 2 years of working. And that probably doesn't help a lot with critical thinking. That
doesn't help the creativity and critical thinking either. Yeah. But not just writers, not just Hollywood. Hollywood's going to do what sells. You had a good point on this. If they can get something that's a known quantity, right? They know they're going to spend X dollars on a film, and then they know that the 10th Marvel movie is going to gross so much that their profits locked in.
Like they had, what was it, like 6 Shrek movies before they were like, oh, maybe these aren't making money anymore. I was like, yeah, I wonder why.
I don't know if the delta between the highest grossing film and the cost for the film is still the Blair Witch Project, but that was like when I was a kid. In high school or whenever that came out. And the Blair Witch Project was like amazing because they spent $0 on the film.
Yeah. And it's just like shot on like a portable camera, right? Something like that.
It did incredibly well. And there was an element of creativity in that for certain. All right, that brings our show to a close. I've been your host, Phil Silberman. Austin Black has been my co-host. Like us, follow us, review us wherever you get your podcast. Remember, nothing in this show is to be considered legal advice, and this has all been for entertainment purposes only.
Unless you're considering getting married.
All right. If you have a legal question, email us at info@silblawfirm.com. Tell us you want it publicly answered in the podcast. That's info@silb, S-I-L-B, like boy, lawfirm.com. Everybody have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys. Bye.